Happy New Year to everyone. I know this is the Western New Year. It's January, right? Beginning of the year 2021 here in early January. And I am honored to be able to speak to you about the World Peace Diet, about the Buddhist Dharma teachings, animal liberation, and spiritual awakening, and the way that we can create a more healthy, harmonious, and compassionate world that's in alignment with the truth of the interconnectedness of all life, which I think is really the goal in many ways of our individual practices and also of our communities, our spiritual communities, and the Dharma teachings really emphasize, I think, the importance of cultivation of our own internal mental states to bring them in harmony with our true nature through meditation and through selfless action and through trying to understand more deeply who we are, actually, to do self-inquiry and understand our true nature. So what I'd like to do is just talk about the underlying ideas of veganism and vegetarianism, and then talk a little bit specifically about veganism and how it relates to the Buddhist spiritual teachings and spiritual awakening in general. And then, as we just heard from the venerable colleague and brother, we'll have an opening, just question and answers, and I'm happy to discuss any questions anyone has. So welcome everyone, and here we go. We'll just go ahead and dive into it. So I want to just emphasize at the very beginning that I think the basic news I have to share is good news. The good news is that we as human beings have a physical body that does not require us to kill animals to be healthy. We have no physical need for animal flesh or for dairy products or for eggs. So that's the really good news, just to understand. And I myself have been a vegan now for over 40 years. And I'm sure I'm just as healthy and probably quite a bit, actually much healthier than people my age. And I'm not the only one. There's, I'm sure, literally many millions of people who have been eating a plant-based diet for many decades and who are just as healthy and probably quite a bit healthier than the average population. So this is the good news, is that we don't need to imprison animals, to impregnate them against their will, to steal their lives, to steal their purposes, to steal their milk and their eggs and their babies and all these things that we're doing. It's not necessary. So that's the good news. And so one of the main ideas, of course, in Buddhist teaching and practice is the precepts, the 5 precepts, 10 precepts, and then, you know, beyond that, many more precepts. But the precepts of living, the 5 basic precepts, I just want to say at the beginning, are very important in Buddhist practice: not to kill, not to steal, not to sexually abuse others, and not to lie or deceive, and not to drink alcohol or take drugs or cause others to use liquors or drugs which are harmful to them or which confuse them and weaken the mind of others. So the whole idea, these 5 things, unfortunately, all 5 of these things we are doing to animals, non-human animals, on a massive scale in our society. And we are, I think, suffering the consequences. The animals are suffering the consequences. So I just want to emphasize how important I think it is that we broaden our understanding of the 5 precepts. And in the Buddhist teaching, and I think really in spiritual teachings generally, we shouldn't only be kind and loving to human beings. We're called to be kind and loving and respectful of other living beings, of all sentient beings. If a being can suffer, then it's not only human beings that we should be respectful of, it's all sentient beings. And this is a very integral part of the Buddhist teaching, and I think other traditions as well recognize this. All traditions recognize, and we see this with our companion animals very easily. We would be very unhappy if our companion animals like dogs or cats perhaps were to be maliciously harmed by others for no good reason, unnecessarily. And so the fact is, of course, that cows and pigs and chickens and turkeys and ducks and geese and lambs and sheep and fishes are all as sentient as dogs and cats, and really in many ways as human beings. They have the same central nervous system that is capable of feeling pain and suffering. They also have psychological capacities to feel fear and pain and have sadness when their relationships are destroyed, mothers when their babies are stolen, whether they're cows or pigs or other animals will be very upset emotionally. They have social pain, emotional and psychological pain, like in many ways, like we have. Some scientists actually say that the pain that they experience is more acute because we as human beings can rationalize and explain suffering to ourselves. And so that can help distance ourselves from the suffering, whereas animals just feel it directly and may suffer in some ways more acutely than we do. So I think we all feel at a deep level a yearning to protect animals from unnecessary violence and abuse and cruelty. And we try to protect them. Every government in the world has certain laws in place to protect animals. But one of the main reasons I wrote the World Peace Diet was to really help us to understand how important it is that we do treat animals with kindness and respect. The main idea is that when I wrote the World Peace Diet, and I think it's still the same today, we know that we have a long list of very serious problems in our world today that we're trying to solve. We have problems with war, with conflict, with injustice, with poverty, with social inequality, with disease, and with hunger and starvation, with inequality between men and women, and racial inequality. And there's so many problems, all those problems, and environmental problems, deforestation, and global climate destabilization, and water pollution, all these problems, a long list of problems. And on that list, everyone would agree, one of the problems that we have as part of those problems is human abuse of animals. Everyone recognizes that is a problem. However, most people say that that problem is not very important compared to all these other problems that we humans have, our own problems, our disease, our social injustice, our poverty, our hunger. That's the most serious problem. And so the whole idea is that we'll take care of those human problems first, and then later, after we get those solved, then we'll care about animals after that. That's kind of farther down on the list. That's not so important. But I really wrote the World Peace Diet, and I'm speaking today to encourage us to take much more seriously the reality and the consequences of animal abuse by humans, that human abuse of animals should be much higher on the list. Number one, because it is so much more, it's such a bigger amount of suffering. We human beings are killing and confining hundreds of billions of animals, far more than there are human beings on this planet every year. Literally trillions of animals are killed every year when we include marine animals. So we're talking about a system of killing and hyper confinement and mutilation and abuse of animals that goes far beyond, by orders of many orders of magnitude, what we do to each other in terms of sheer amount of violence and misery that we are actually inflicting and that is being experienced by sentient beings. Animal agriculture and eating these animals, as well as using them in experimentation and vivisection for products, for entertainment. There's so many ways that animals are abused and trafficked and killed and so forth. So that's number one. And number two, which is very important, is the fact that the practice of animal agriculture leads in many ways directly to these other problems. In other words, the fact that we're eating so much meat and dairy products is the direct reason we're cutting down trees in the rainforest at an unsustainable rate, destabilizing the climate, causing a mass extinction of species, causing the destruction of indigenous populations of people, causing tremendous amounts of disease because animal agriculture is so wasteful. It's causing hunger and poverty that wouldn't be happening. We're growing enough food every year to feed at least 10 billion people, probably closer to 12 or 15, or some experts say 20 billion people every year, if we would feed all of the corn and soy and alfalfa, other grains that we're growing, if we fed them to people directly. So what we're doing with animal agriculture, the physical act of eating meat and dairy products and eggs, is causing the problems that we're facing of disease, of hunger, of environmental devastation, of injustice, because this injustice leads directly to war and conflict. So animal agriculture is causing the problems that we are facing. It's actually invisible. We don't recognize it. We haven't made that connection yet. It's not talked about in the mainstream media. Governments do not talk about this. So it's really important, I think, for us in the Buddhist community and in general, anyone who's interested in creating a world of harmony and peace, that we look deeper, we look more deeply into the causes of the problems we're having. It doesn't help to treat the symptoms of a problem if you don't treat the causes of the problem. And so animal agriculture is the cause of the problem on the physical level. But what I really want to talk about is the second aspect of that, which is that animal agriculture creates within us as human beings a certain way of thinking and a certain mentality and set of attitudes that cause these problems at a deeper level. In other words, animal agriculture and eating meat and dairy products and eggs requires us to disconnect from our natural wisdom and compassion. In the Buddhist tradition, this is referred to as prajna, for example. Prajna is wisdom, karuna is compassion. These are Sanskrit words, but the teachings are that the most important thing we can do is to cultivate karuna, cultivate compassion, cultivate prajna or wisdom. And animal agriculture requires us to reduce and destroy our natural empathy and kindness and caring for others, for animals, for the work. Think of the workers. Think of people who have to kill animals all day. You know, these workers have the highest rates of suicide and drug addiction and alcoholism and spousal abuse and child abuse, worker-related injuries. They're just stabbing animals all day and harming them, and sexually abusing them all day. That's what workers have to do. That they have to impregnate animals. They have to steal the baby pigs or the baby cows or the baby chickens from their mothers, kill the babies, and impregnate the mothers again. I mean, this is terrible work, the most violent, terrible work that any human being can ever do. And we pay people to do that. And so animal agriculture requires us to have a society that brings out the worst in people, in the workers and in us, because then we not only take out our wallets and pay people to do this violence, to cause tremendous suffering to these animals, both acute suffering and chronic suffering, and acute pain and chronic pain, but then, and the workers and the ecosystems are destroyed, and water is polluted, and air is polluted, and climates are destabilized, and rainforests are cut down. And it's the most devastating thing we do to the environment and to future generations is animal agriculture. So it's to our society, to our physical health. So we cause all these problems by voting for it with our dollars and paying for it. But then we eat it. We actually eat that. We bring the energy and the reality of violence and terror and fear and pain and despair and anxiety and misery and sadness, all of those terrible negative emotions that animals are feeling and that people are feeling, the frustration that they feel and the revenge and so forth. And we eat that, right? We're eating that reality of that. And then we want to sit and meditate and create world peace. I mean, it's not going to ever happen. It's never going to work. It's completely against the spiritual teachings of the 5 precepts of the Noble Eightfold Path. And everything. You cannot be eating animal-based foods, really, I don't think, and be serious about following a path of spiritual awakening and liberation and human liberation, because animal agriculture requires us not only to harm animals, but to create an inner mentality and set of attitudes that promotes harming others for my own benefit. That's the opposite of the bodhisattva ideal. And in the Mahayana Buddhist tradition, as we all know, a bodhisattva is really the ideal that we strive to emulate, where we are willing to help others, and even if it hurts us, we're willing to help them. Right? That's the whole idea. Even if I have less, but I want to help make others happy, because we know ultimately this is the only way that we'll be happy, is if we help make others happy. People who want to become happy themselves and don't care about the happiness of others end up never being happy. People who care about others and try to help others to be happy, then we get happy because we're all interconnected. There's one life living through all expressions of life. It's like my hand. There's all these different fingers, and if each finger says, "Oh, I'm taller than you are, and I'm better than you are," and they fight with each other, that's because they're ignorant. They don't, and if they have their own separate desires and they're competing with each other, then the whole hand becomes crippled. And we're like that. We're all fingers on a gigantic hand, right? We're all part of a larger being. We are interrelated on such profound ways. Our happiness is interrelated. The more we work on our own inner peace and treat others in our relationships with kindness and respect, because we feel at peace with ourselves, the more we help others to be at peace, the more they can treat others with peace. So peace spreads throughout our society through kindness and actions of love and caring and respect. And animals are just as sentient as we are. So if we build a society based on animal agriculture, where every morning we wake up in the morning and we eat meat, or we eat dairy products, or we eat eggs, right away we're causing suffering. We're eating that suffering. We're sending a message to our body and to our mind that I don't care. I don't care about the suffering of others. I don't care about the suffering of hungry people, of future generations, of workers, of indigenous people, of ecosystems, of wildlife. I only care about myself. I only care because it tastes good, or because that's my habit. That's what my mother told me. That's what my father told me. That's what the ads on TV tell me I should eat. That's what my doctor told me I should eat. It's self-centered motivation. And what the Buddhist teachings are always emphasizing is that liberation for us as human beings comes about through compassion and wisdom. And wisdom is recognizing that there is no fundamentally separate self. And this idea that I am a concrete, fundamentally separate self, separate from other separate selves, that's the basic ignorance which causes me then to want something and not want something, right? We have ignorance, avidya, and then out of avidya, we have craving. I want this, and I want that, and I want that. And then we have all this attachment and wanting and lust for more things and ambition. And then we have the opposite of that, which is I don't want that, and I don't want that. We have hatred, and we have ill will, and we keep them away. We don't like them. They might get in the way. So we're always in this struggle of wanting something and keeping something away. And that's samsara. And that's the samsaric delusion of suffering that never ends. And animal agriculture is the main force. Eating meat and dairy products and eggs is the main force driving samsara. We force the animals into hell. And when we force other beings into hell, we end up in hell. Whatever we sow, so shall we reap. Karma really works. And so if we're going to sow seeds of misery and terror and pain and stealing the purposes and the milk and the eggs and the lives and the flesh of other beings, we're going to lose that ourselves. We lose our own health. We lose our own happiness. But we live in a society where we don't practice that. We practice the opposite of that. We practice these diluted religious traditions that tell us somehow we can be saved, or it doesn't matter what we do to animals. It doesn't matter. And I think when we look deeply into the Buddhist teachings, we see that it does matter. When we look deeply into our own mind and heart, we see that it does matter. We all know in our bones that if we're sowing seeds of carrots and broccoli, we're not going to be reaping corn and millet or something else, right? We're going to, whatever we sow, we're going to reap. And so I think it's very important to broaden the idea of vegetarianism to include veganism, because the word vegan actually, as you probably already know, but I'll just say it briefly, was coined by a British fellow named Donald Watson, who was the secretary of the Vegetarian Society of London back in 1944. And he and a few friends wanted to create a word that would account for motivation, because the word vegetarian does not account for motivation. I can be a vegetarian because I don't like meat, or because it's cheaper, or any reason, doesn't matter. So he wanted a word that would account for motivation, and the motivation of compassion and kindness. And number two, he wanted a word that would include all of unnecessary abuse of animals, not only non-human animals, but also human animals. I mean, we're also, from a scientific perspective, we're also animals, we're also mammals. So we should try to live a life of kindness and respect for other people, other human beings, and non-human beings, all sentient beings. So this is actually, veganism is actually an ancient Buddhist idea with a new Western English word, but it's ahimsa. Ahimsa is the ancient Sanskrit word that means non-violence or non-harmfulness. That's all it is, basically. So the definition that Donald Watson wrote down back then was that veganism is a philosophy and a way of life which seeks to exclude or eliminate as far as possible and practicable all forms of exploitation of and cruelty to animals for food, clothing, or any other purpose. So that's basically it. It's very simple. It's just simply doing the best we can to minimize the amount of violence we're causing to others, other beings, and to do the best we can to live that every day. So a lot of times we can see the violence when we eat the flesh of an animal, right? We know if I'm eating the flesh of a cow or a pig or a fish or a chicken, that's violence because we had to kill the animal to eat that. So it's obvious. When we talk about dairy products and eggs, people say, well, that's not violent. I mean, the cow gives us her milk, the chicken gives us her eggs. So they give milk anyway, they have eggs anyway, so there's no violence. So that's okay. So I think it's very important for us to extend vegetarianism to veganism, because there's tremendous amount of violence actually in dairy products and eggs. And I've done research on this for many decades, and I'll just give a brief overview just to make it clear. But the basic idea is that certainly, as we all know, a cow is a mammal like we are, and a cow will never give milk, just like a woman never gives milk unless she has a baby. So the first thing you have to do on any dairy, organic or not, is you have to have these babies. You have to have babies. So a young cow on a dairy operation she's typically, they're given a variety of different hormones and drugs so that they will be able to become pregnant when they're very, very young, just babies still, right? They'll give them prolactin, progesterone, oxytocin, and other hormones and drugs to push them into an early pregnancy, being able to, and then they're impregnated on what they call a rape rack, which again, it's a form of sexual abuse. The cow, she doesn't have a choice, right? I mean, she's just, you have a man who has a gun with sperm in it, and where does he get the sperm? I mean, it's not nice to talk about, but the sperm comes from sexually abusing male cows, right? You have to sexually abuse them to get their sperm, put it into a gun, and then put it in the vagina of the cow, and then pull a trigger, and so this cow gets impregnated. And so it's an act of violence from the very beginning. And then after 9 months, she gives birth to a little baby. It's the same. She has the same length of pregnancy that we human beings have. And after 9 months, she gives birth to a little calf. And it's very well known that cows and calves have a very tight bond emotionally. The cow will do anything for that little calf, and the little calf is completely dependent on the mother cow. But on any dairy, organic or not, the baby is always taken away. Always, right away, you take the baby away. That causes enormous mental and emotional suffering to the mother and to the baby. The baby is 75% of the time is killed right away. They just kill the baby. And the mother starts giving milk, but there's no baby. So they just take the milk and they sell it. But they also, and then they impregnate her again within a month. So she's pregnant and lactating simultaneously, which no mammal is designed for that. That's devastating to their health. And as soon as she gives birth to another, she's pregnant and lactating at the same time, giving milk and also growing a baby. So she has to eat a huge amount. She has to drink a lot. It's very, very hard on her body. And then she gives birth to another baby. The baby is, again, stolen right away and killed right away. And she's impregnated again and giving milk again and pregnant and lactating. So even though cows would live naturally about 25 years, roughly 20 to 25 years, on any dairy, organic or not, when they reach only 5 years old, they kill them because they're worn out. They can't give milk anymore because they've been pregnant and lactating simultaneously, which no mammal is designed to do. And so they just kill them. And one of the babies, they'll be like, usually at that point, she will have given birth to 4 babies and then they kill her. One of the 4 babies will become a slave on the dairy. They won't kill, they kill all the males and they kill half the females, basically. So half the females are killed. Half of the females, they'll keep one out of 4, and she'll become a slave on the dairy, and they'll do the same thing to her. So it just goes like that. Every 5 years, it's a rape and kill operation. There's more suffering in cheese than there is in a burger, I would say. I mean, in terms of just suffering of the baby calves, the mothers, and they're very badly treated. Cows are large, powerful animals. They don't like to be milked. They don't like to have their babies stolen. They're resisting. So I won't tell you, but I've seen a lot of undercover video footage of what goes on dairies, whether they're big dairies or small dairies or little family farm dairies. The cows are terribly treated. They're kicked and punched and stabbed and terribly abused routinely. That just goes on. You only find out about it when people work undercover and have a hidden camera and they take videos of what's going on. And people who do this say there's never, ever any operation ever where they don't find terrible cruelty to these animals. So it's always happening. And we should never think that there's some kind of a place where these loving farmers taking care of their cows, because you have to kill them. You have to kill the males. You have to kill the males. You can't, otherwise you have to just feed them. You can't just keep feeding cows. You have to kill them. So there's no such thing as compassionate milk. There's no such thing as compassionate meat. You have to kill the animals. The same thing is true with eggs, actually. It's the same system. I mean, chickens normally, naturally, in the jungles of Southeast Asia would only give a handful of eggs every year. But now through genetic manipulation, they force the hens to give a lot more eggs. And these eggs, of course, are stolen from them. The females are all kept together. There's no males allowed. So it's a very violent system. It doesn't allow females and males to live together. And it's, again, stealing the eggs from the animals and then killing the animals. Typically, most eggs come from battery cages where the female animals, the birds, are confined terribly. They can never spread their wings their entire life. I mean, it's really torture, terrible pain and suffering for these animals. There's probably no more violent and cruel food in the world than an egg. Egg has the more suffering I can't imagine. I mean, a typical egg has a tremendous amount of suffering. And it's the domination of female animals. I mean, we have to remember that it's really, it's the domination of male. I mean, the male hens, male chickens that are born on an egg operation, they just grind them up alive or suffocate them alive as soon as they're born. So it's a terrible, violent death for the males. But the females have it worse because then they're confined. They have their beaks chopped off, which causes terrible pain to them, both acutely and chronically. and then they're hyper confined and their eggs are stolen. They're very often force molted, which means they're starved and deprived of water to shock their system to give more eggs. So it's a very hideous, violent system, and it's based on dominating the female animals. And I think from a spiritual point of view, the most important thing is to cultivate mindfulness, to be aware of our actions, to be aware of the consequences of our actions. And when we have a system in place that causes us to not be mindful, right? It causes us, we don't want to think about where our eggs come from if we're eating eggs. We don't want to think where our cheese or milk or ice cream are coming from if we're eating them. We don't want to think about where our fish and pork and burgers are coming if we're eating meat. We want to reduce our mindfulness. We want to not take responsibility for our actions. I mean, this is the complete contrary to the Dharma. It's the exact opposite of the Dharma. You can't get farther away from the Dharma than cultivating a sense of, I don't care about the consequences of my actions, and I'm not going to be mindful. I want to be unconscious as possible. I mean, you can't get farther away from the Dharma than that. That's the extreme opposite. It causes suffering that always comes back to oneself in this life or the next life. And so we have to realize that in many ways, it's not our fault if we're eating meat or dairy products or eggs. It's just simply we're born into a system where we're taught to do that from the time we're little children by very well-meaning, loving people like our parents and teachers and friends and neighbors and relatives, and everybody does it. That's the only reason anyone eats animal foods, is because we're following orders. You know, we're just doing what we've been taught to do. We're just following the orders that everybody is doing. We're just going along with the crowd. We're just being part of a system without thinking about it, without questioning it. So what veganism is, and I think really what the Buddhist Dharma is, what the Buddha did at the very beginning, 2,500 years ago, when he left the palace, and he said, I'm going to question old age and sickness and death and the possibility of spiritual awakening. He didn't just live a normal life. He said we have to leave home. Now, leaving home means we question the official narratives in our society, especially those narratives that are toxic, that are harmful, that cause unnecessary suffering to other beings and to ourselves, that cause delusion and ignorance and violence, and create bondage and suffering, that create birth in the lower realms. Because animal agriculture and eating meat and dairy products and eggs are all terribly violent and abusive to animals and to ourselves. And that's another point I just want to make briefly here. And I'm going to wrap it up here in a few minutes. And I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have at that point. But it's very important to understand also that animal flesh is not healthy for us to eat. I think we understand that. It's very well documented now by science and medicine that a diet that has a lot of meat in it causes a lot of problems: heart disease, liver disease, kidney disease, and many forms of cancer, strokes. These are linked to diets that are high in meat, especially fatty meats that are high in saturated fat and cholesterol. Animal protein in general is very toxic for us physically because it causes acid to form. So it's also inflammatory, and it's well understood that the hospitals are filled up with people who are there because their tissues are inflamed and acidified, basically, which comes from eating a lot of processed foods, and especially meat is a very big contributor to that. And so to cut meat out of our diets is great, for our health. We'll find our arteries will run cleaner. Our digestion is not designed for meat. We don't have teeth and a jaw and saliva and digestive juices really that are acidic enough to digest meat. So it's much better not to eat meat from the point of view of our health. And that's well understood nowadays. But it's really important to understand that dairy products and eggs are even much worse than meat in terms of our own physical health. That especially dairy products and eggs, I mean, both of these, because dairy products are a food that is designed specifically for a bovine animal, an animal that's going to put on maybe 1,000 pounds, maybe 500 kilograms. You're going to in 1 year. It's very rich and high in fat, very high in protein. It has a certain type of protein, in fact, called casein, which is the main protein in cow's milk, which we cannot digest. Human beings cannot digest casein. No one, whether the Europeans, Asians, no one can digest casein. In order to digest casein, you need to be a little calf. We need an enzyme called renin, which calves have in their stomachs. We do not have renin. So anytime we're eating dairy products, especially cheese and milk and skim milk, these have a lot of casein. So we're eating a food that causes massive inflammation and acidification and cancer. Breast cancer, prostate cancer, colon cancer are well understood to be caused by dairy consumption, by consumption of casein, because we can't digest casein. It causes autoimmune diseases, all these leaky gut problems, Crohn's disease. There's so many diseases, multiple sclerosis, all linked to dairy. There's one thing that's causing the hospitals to be filled up in pharmaceutical industry, making a lot of money and having lots of disease, which gives a lot of money really to these big pharmaceutical companies. It's dairy products. If we would stop eating dairy products, it's worse than meat in terms of sickness, in terms of violence, in terms of sickness. There's nothing worse than dairy products. We're not cows. So to eat a food designed for another species that's so different from us makes no sense. It's really terrible. And eggs are also, the eggs are the highest concentration of cholesterol of any food on the entire planet Earth. So it's been well documented that eating 1 egg a day gives a cancer risk equal to smoking a pack of cigarettes every day. So eating eggs is eating cancer, causing foods, just like dairy. Dairy is also linked with cancer. And both of these foods are terrible. Diabetes, obesity, osteoporosis, these are all linked to dairy and egg consumption because our bodies we have a wisdom. And when we go against the wisdom of our body, we go against the wisdom of our spirituality, we force ourselves to abandon the precepts, to abandon the practice of meditation, of mindfulness. I mean, we can still meditate. We can eat meat and dairy and meditate, but the foods that we're eating and the mentality that we are cultivating, in many ways, is the opposite of a meditative mentality, in the sense that we're causing suffering that's unnecessary. There are alternatives to dairy products. Now, I mean, when I became a vegan 40 years ago, there really wasn't any alternative milks or alternative ice cream or alternative cheese. Not that you really need that, but today there is, right? Today there's all kinds of soy milk and rice milk and almond milk and oat milk and coconut milk and hazelnut milk and everything you can think of, and cheese and ice cream and butter and everything made from plants that looks and tastes a lot like dairy products. And the same thing for eggs. There's egg substitutes as well. There's meat substitutes, and there's tofu and tempeh and vegetables and fruits and grains and nuts and seeds. There's plenty of food. There's more variety than we can ever imagine. So it's just simply, so why would we eat animals? Why would we eat dairy products? Why would we eat meat? Why? What's the reason? Why do we do it? We have to really ask ourselves, why do we do it? Is it because we're just on a habit without thinking? We just eat what we told because we like it. We have a preference. But that's not a reason. I don't go steal somebody's watch from them and say, well, why did you steal his watch? Oh, I liked it. I just took it. I mean, you can't do that. You can't go steal somebody else's milk, steal somebody else's eggs kill their baby and steal it because you like it. I mean, that's not an option. That's like as far away as you can get from any kind of authentic Dharma teaching. So our preference or our habit, or because we're not thinking, we just do what we're told. We just follow orders. We wouldn't just follow orders if they were to harm our family members. We wouldn't just do it. Why do we do it when it's animals? Or because the doctor told us? Well, get a second opinion. Just because the doctor tells me I have to eat dog meat, that doesn't mean I'm going to start killing dogs, or horse meat or cat meat or any other flesh. Or, I mean, the whole idea is we are called to take responsibility for our actions. And that's really what freedom is. Freedom is taking responsibility for our own lives. Freedom is taking responsibility for our own health. Freedom is taking responsibility for our own quality of our consciousness. I can't, if I'm unhappy, I can't blame it on other people. I have to take responsibility. And I think this is really the essence of the Buddhist teaching in many ways for our world today. We're always blaming, we're taught by the media to blame germs and viruses, or to blame enemies for our problems. And the Buddha was saying, no, we have to work on ourself. We have to work on our quality of our own consciousness, take responsibility for the quality of our mind, to have a mind that's in the present moment and that's filled with goodwill and kindness for others, because we understand that we're not separate from others. And when we have that understanding and we live from that understanding, then we create a field of healing. And then when we create communities where we promote these ideas and we discuss these ideas, then we are helping to heal our world. So I just want to thank all of you, because I know that you're part of communities that are communities based on service and kindness, compassion, healing, freedom, taking responsibility for our actions, being a force in the world of caring. And that's the essence, I think, the essence of the Buddhist teaching, is to combine this an outer life of kindness and respect and caring and compassion to help others, and an inner life of reflection and contemplation, and then looking deeply and seeing the deeper causes of things, to be willing to question the official stories in our society and to trust our own inner wisdom, which I think takes a certain amount of practice, of daily meditation, a certain amount of courage to just be able to stand on our own feet, and then to lovingly support each other in the process without blaming anyone, without criticizing anyone, without shaming anyone, to realize that we're all wounded. We're born into a society where that's what everybody does. So we've been programmed in many ways to eat these foods, to think in these ways. And so now it's about healing our wounds, healing the inner wounds, healing the wounds of our behavior, and helping others to heal. So that when someone else is wounded, we don't hit them or yell at them or blame them. We try to be loving and kind to them. So all the words I'm sharing this evening, I hope you understand, are words of love and kindness for you, for animals, for future generations, for all of us. It's simply to raise awareness about the consequences of our actions and to heal our own delusions through looking deeply and clearly into the underlying causes of the problems that we're having, so that we can then be part of the solution and create communities of kindness and caring. Because I think that's the underlying idea, is that the only reason we eat animal foods is because of the communities that we're raised in. So if we can transform our communities, then the future generations, the children, will be born into communities where they're not eating meat and dairy products and eggs, where they're encouraged to be kind and caring, and to look deeply and to care deeply, to listen deeply, to feel deeply, to be like Kuan Yin, the Bodhisattva Kuan Yin, Chenrezig Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of listening, to just listen deeply to the cries of the world, and to hear the cries of the world, and then to respond to the cries of the world as skillfully as we can. And that takes cultivating prajna and karuna, compassion and wisdom, which I think only happens in community, when we're living our lives engaged in an engaged way. All right, so thank you all so much for your kind attention.